I would like you to join me in welcoming Professor Michael Preston-Shoot, who has come from the University of Bedfordshire and is going to talk to us about safeguarding and making it personal. And he's going to share his learning from the UK, and hopefully I'm sure he's going to give us lots and lots of food for thought for the morning.
Good morning, everybody. As I said yesterday, I always like applause at the beginning because I can't guarantee that I'll get any applause at the end, but we'll see how we go. Siobhan, Martina, thank you very much for the warm introductions and welcome, and Tim, thank you very much for facilitating me to be here. And apologies to a few of you because you will have heard at least some of this yesterday. So you're in for a double whammy, I'm afraid. But hopefully I'll mix the messages up a bit, and there'll be sufficient new for you. I think you stand on the threshold of a dream in the Republic, insofar as I have learned about the journey in which the HSE and colleagues are on. I think you're on the threshold of a dream. And to realise the hopes within that dream and the ambitions within that dream, I would really encourage all of you in this audience who are frontline practitioners, who are managers of frontline practitioners, who are staff development and training personnel, to collect human stories and to ensure that Martina, Tim and others who are driving the journey strategically with your legislators and others, to really make sure that they know what your human stories are. Those human stories may be of financial abuse, self-neglect, organisational abuse and neglect, sexual exploitation, whatever. They are important human stories, particularly if you put alongside them where you believe there are strengths in the current system and where you believe there are strengths in the proposals for a new system, and where you believe there are vulnerabilities in the current system, and where there may be, from your point of view, vulnerabilities in the systems that are proposed going forward. Think if there is one lesson I can bring from England and our journey through to the 2014 Care Act and its implementation, it is that we did not use human stories sufficiently. And that there are therefore in England some shortcomings, in my view, in relation to the legislation we now have, particularly around power of entry, and particularly around not following the Scottish model of protection orders. And maybe some of the reason for that is that we were not advocating on the basis of real human stories and pointing out the strengths and the vulnerabilities in current systems. So collect and share your stories would be one message from today. I've been asked to talk about making safeguarding personal. I shall do that as best I can. I've also been asked to share with you some findings from safeguarding adult reviews, as we now call them, serious case reviews as we used to call them, in relation to adults who have experienced significant harm. I will do that, and I may from time to time, as I did yesterday, go off-piste a little and make some comments about the strengths and the weaknesses of the legislation we have in England, and what I see as perhaps a more comprehensive system in Scotland. And I'm going to have to speak to the mic because I didn't always do that yesterday. So those of you who may have heard yesterday on YouTube will have heard a lot of air at various points because I wasn't looking in the right direction. So forgive me if I concentrate on that black thing there. Why making safeguarding personal? I don't know the extent to which this applies in the Republic, but if you talk to adult safeguarding academics in England in particular, one of the refrains you will hear loud and long is that after the NHS and Community Care Act 1990, which changed the face of adult social care practice and the legislation underpinning it in England, we lost humanity in our system. we lost an emphasis on relationships in our system, and we replaced humanity and relationships with very much a focus on process and procedure. This was illustrated very clearly to me when I was doing some research on self-neglect for the Department of Health in the run-up to the 2014 Care Act, and I went to one London borough to see how they were organised around assessments, service provision and review of adults needing care and support. And there was one team that focused on doing assessments, sometimes by social workers, sometimes by social care workers. So if I was a potential service user, I would see someone from team 1 who would assess my care and support needs. If out of that assessment came a decision that I required care and support, a social worker or a social care worker from team 2 would come and put together a care and support plan and a financial assessment and so on. And then the plan would be implemented, my case would be closed, and 6 months down the line, a social worker or social care worker from team 3 would come to do a review of the outcome of my care and support plan. One human individual having to deal with at least 3 personnel on that journey through the first 6 months towards care and support, sometimes involving safeguarding issues. As my partner Susie Bray would tell you if she were here, I'm not the most trusting individual. I've lived with Susie for something like 28 years or so, and she routinely shares with me drafts of presentations that she has put together, drafts of academic papers that she has put together, drafts of safeguarding adult reviews that she has put together. And she says, Michael, what do you think of this? And she trusts me with what I will say and how I will respond. I find it incredibly difficult to do the same. Right? And I've been in psychotherapy on and off over the years for long enough, and trained as a psychotherapist and as a family therapist to have some idea about where that comes from. And I'm using that personal illustration simply as a way of saying that if I was in that London borough having to deal with 3 teams of personnel, I would find that enormously challenging. And I'm using it as an illustration of how we lost relationships, continuity, trust, humanity in our English system. And I'm not alone in that view. A well-known director of adult social services, whose name will appear on the references at the end, a woman called A.D. Cooper. I'm sure she wouldn't mind my saying where this comes from, and she has been a pioneer of making safeguarding personal. She's a social work manager who never lost her social work values as a director of adult social services in the London Borough of Sutton. And she once said to me, Michael, we've got to get back to relationship-based practice. And she actually called it good old-fashioned social work. I'm not sure whether social work was ever that good or that old-fashioned in the 1970s when I began and the 1980s when I continued. But I knew what she meant. And that's where this slide about where does making safeguarding personal comes from. It comes from that desire shared across academics, across practitioners, across managers, and, to be fair, some civil servants. It comes with that desire to recalibrate, to reconfigure our system in England for the reasons which the slide contains. And if you want a graphic illustration of why we began this journey and why we are still on this journey, then I commend this slide to you. You will find it on the East Cheshire Safeguarding Adult Board website, where they have part of that website reserved for a service user and caregiver subgroup. The service user group has put together at least one video about their experiences of care and support and their experiences of adult safeguarding. They do presentations, they go to conferences to present their perspective on making safeguarding personal. And because of the pressures of time, we haven't got time to leave it up, although I might over lunch, with permission, return to it. But basically, as you look at it on the extreme left, you will see actually what looks like the Pale of Dublin, which just goes to show that I do know some history about the Republic. That's their critique of the system as it was, and to some degree the system as it still is. And the journey that we've been on in England, and the journey that I suspect you're on in the Republic, is towards the bright sunshine in the top right-hand corner. And service users and supporters of service users, advocates also are a key part of constructing this journey and then walking it. And why do we need to do it? Well, here are two quotes from family members. We have a system in England now known as safeguarding adult reviews, previously known as serious case reviews. And when an adult dies or experiences serious significant harm, safeguarding adult boards in the 152 local authority areas in England have to undertake a safeguarding review where there were additional concerns about how the agencies did or did not work effectively together. And some of those safeguarding reviews have really pioneered family involvement in reviews, which is now built into the statutory guidance we have, which accompanies the Care Act in England. And sometimes family members draft either a section of the review or an appendix at the end, which actually gives a statement of their perspective. So the top one, it's on the Westminster Safeguarding Adult Board website, known as Mr. BB, and the statement comes from his wife. And you can see that she takes strong issue with the word protection and the phrase protection plan. And she had really quite strong views, as the quote demonstrates, about the use of power by social workers, social care workers, district nurses, GPs and others in relation to her husband who had advanced Alzheimer's. That essentially was a safeguarding review about a case of self-neglect, which in England we have now included in adult safeguarding as a result of the 2014 Care Act and as a result of the research which the Department of Health commissioned from Susie Bray, David Orr and myself. So we have included self-neglect in our adult safeguarding arrangements. Scotland did so as a result of the Adult Support and Protection Act 2007 in Scotland. Wales, in fact, included self-neglect way back in the year 2000 in its policy at the time known as In Safe Hands. And this is one of my off-piste moments, and Tim and others heard me say it yesterday. Self-neglect needs a home. And I believe that home should be an adult safeguarding home. They've done that in the United States, where their adult protection system data suggests that self-neglect is the largest element of adult protection in the United States, far larger than organizational abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, and so forth. And where they have mandatory reporting in some of the states in Australia, the same feature emerges. And you now do have, Susie and I were talking with Tim yesterday, you now do have some emergent data about cases of self-neglect. 7% overall, 12% I think it was, of older persons' cases. Those cases need a home. They need somewhere that takes some strategic oversight about what will help practitioners work with very, very complex cases. End of off-piste. Pebble thrown into the pond. Let's see where the ripples go in the Republic. The second paragraph is actually from a different type of abuse and neglect. This is a young woman called Melissa who was in a supported living arrangement where she had been placed alongside a number of other people with learning disabilities and complex needs and challenging behaviour, and she was murdered by one of those other people with whom she was placed. And the review focuses in no small measure on whether that placement was a safe and appropriate placement to make, both for Melissa, who was the victim, but also for the young man who murdered her. And it looks at the challenges of the operation of our market in England in relation to whether we have sufficient provision for people with very complex and challenging needs. And this is a statement by her father at the end of the review process, and you can find it on the Bristol Safeguarding Adult Board website. And what comes through there? An absence of humanity is really what hits me about that quote. So again, when you're collecting human stories, and you're thinking about the strengths and the vulnerabilities of the current system in the Republic and the proposed system in the Republic, I would urge you to think about the place of humanity and relationships within what is current and what is proposed. As you've heard Martina say, making safeguarding personal is about a person-led and an outcome-focused, working with, not doing to, individuals. It starts, but crucially does not end with, a focus on the individual and how that individual sees their situation, their perception of what is happening, their perception of what is important to them and what might need to change. I'm currently, in fact, with Susie, who sadly can't be here today because she's got a hospital appointment. Between us, we're doing a safeguarding adult review at the moment for a safeguarding adult board in the southwest of England. Again, it relates to somebody who self-neglected. There are some key events that happened in that person's life. He'd been looked after by his mother all his life. His mother dies in the summer of at the beginning of 2014. He's then looked after by his sister, who lived next door. She dies several months later. When you read the files, when you look at the chronology, when you look at what the agencies say about their involvement, you learn very, very little about the man at the centre of that case. I don't know how he experienced the death of his mother. I don't know how he experienced the death of his sister. I don't know what he felt about the fact that his brother-in-law then became his main family carer. I don't even know about his wishes and feelings when he was talking with his general practitioner, who was the most consistent person providing care and support, or the odd occasions when he met district nurses, health visitors, staff in accident and emergency departments. I learned precious little about him, and I now can't ask him because he died of his self-neglect and some associated health issues. He died in hospital. And so bruised, I suspect, are the brother-in-law and a nephew who were his final family carers, that they have declined to participate in the review system. So actually I can't ask them either. So it's really important that we start with the individual and we have conversations with the individual. And those of you who are trainers and staff development personnel, you know, one of the things I think that you can crucially provide for frontline staff and the managers of frontline staff is an idea about the skills that can be used to try to engage in those conversations, difficult though they will be sometimes, painful though they will be sometimes, with the individual, with individuals like the one that I have in mind. But crucially, it doesn't stop with that focus on the individual and their wishes and feelings, because in England, and it's the same in Wales and the same in Scotland, we actually don't have a person-led care and support provision system. We don't have a self-assessment system where the individual self-assessment is what is recorded and then what is provided. Alongside the individual's wishes and feelings are the practitioner's knowledge and skills. Ultimately, in the English system, it is the practitioner's knowledge and decision-making that ultimately counts in terms of what is provided, which really reinforces the importance of the focus on the individual and the fact that individual's wishes and feelings are central in what the practitioner ultimately goes on to decide. But the practitioner also needs skills of concerned curiosity and what I have called carefrontational questions. Why have I called it carefrontational? Because that's what one service user said to me really made a difference for him. It was that the social worker didn't give up, didn't take no for an answer, kept on going up the garden path and knocking on the door, was persistent, at times courageous, and asked him really quite challenging questions. But over time he recognised that they were coming from a position of care and compassion. So, you know, staff development officers, trainers in the room, empowering frontline people to have the skills, to have the courage and the resilience to ask those carefrontational questions, supervisors in the room to prepare people for those kinds of conversations, to debrief people after those kinds of conversations, and frontline people, you know, having the courage of your knowledge and your skills, have belief in your knowledge and your skills to ask those questions. Yes, from time to time you'll get thrown out. Right, that's happened to me, and it's happened to people that I have worked with. But if you're persistent and you keep going, eventually they'll let you back in, and the conversation can be renewed. And perhaps over time they'll trust you enough that even when you do ask awkward questions, they don't throw you out. Okay. How did we do it in England? Well, we started small, and I think this too might be something that you want to reflect on in the Republic if and as you go down this journey of making safeguarding personal. We started with 4 local authority pilot sites, and we put together an initial toolkit about how making safeguarding personal might be implemented in those 4 local authority pilot sites. And we ran workshops, we being senior managers, Department of Health civil servants, 3 academics working alongside managers and practitioners. We ran workshops, we offered project support in those pilot sites to test whether making safeguarding personal could work and what was needed to make it work. And then we opened it out to a wider group of local authorities, and we had 52 or so in the second tranche, and then we rebuilt the toolkit on the basis of learning and experience. We ran the second sequence, and then we opened it out to everybody. And in fact now all 152 local authority areas in England are to some degree implementing making safeguarding personal. And it was at that point where we had got a much enhanced toolkit and research evidence about what worked and about how to implement it. It was at that point that the Department of Health wrote it into the statutory guidance in England which accompanies the 2014 Care Act. And in case you're not familiar with the English system and you're wondering what I mean by statutory guidance, in the legal architecture in England and Wales, Parliament or the devolved government in Wales passes legislation which provides the bare skeleton of, in this case, what adult safeguarding will look like. And that bare skeleton is fleshed out by central government guidance which has the force of law. So a local authority and its partner agencies can be judicially reviewed by courts in England and Wales, not just because they haven't implemented the statutory powers and duties appropriately that are within primary legislation, but also because they have neglected the statutory guidance that accompanies it. if you're a driver. It's a bit like the highway code and those signs that have numbers in that you neglect at your peril, or the bit of the highway code that says that footballers like Wayne Rooney mustn't drink alcohol and then drive, because you end up painting park benches in Manchester if you do that. So that's what I mean by statutory guidance. So it was a joint effort overseen locally by safeguarding adult boards in those authorities that, that were part of the initial 3 pilots, and overseen by a national advisory group comprised of people in the Department of Health, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, the Local Government Association, and universities with some research expertise, including my own, in relation to adult safeguarding. So it was a partnership designed to prove and develop the concept and to put together documentation that both passed on knowledge and skills about MSP, but also looked at how embedded it was becoming. And I have to say it remains variable. Some local authorities and their partners are much more advanced in this journey. Places like East Cheshire that produced the picture earlier on, much more advanced than some other local authorities. So it is variable, but it's a journey. Challenges: funding it nationally. We did it on a shoestring. I've heard Tim talk about shoestrings over the last 24, 48 hours, so that will be familiar. We could have gone much quicker, I think, if we had had central government funding of a greater degree than was available to us. Another challenge, of course, is that in England and perhaps too in the Republic, although I understand that the Irish tiger is beginning to roar again, financial austerity, the amount of money being taken out of the public sector, both health and social work, social care. You know, here we are asking for a culture shift. We're asking people to do something different, you know, at a time when you're having to do more with less. And you know, and that's not always a popular message to purvey. You know, sometimes people accuse me of being someone like John McEnroe, saying you can't be serious. But anyway, we found it much easier actually to convince staff about the need for change, but as indeed Martina has highlighted, we found it more challenging to convince some senior managers, not just in social work and social care, but as you see in the slide, in healthcare, police and commissioning arrangements, much harder to convince them that organisational cultures also needed to change. And I will re-emphasise what Martina flagged up. Yes, it's commendable you have days like this. Yes, it's commendable that you're looking at making safeguarding personal. Yes, it's commendable that you are rolling out training about adult safeguarding, mental capacity and whatever it is. But if that's all you do, a lot of people will end up frustrated because you'll be going back into workplaces where you are not able to implement what the best research and practice evidence is suggesting. So again, it's about reviewing the degree to which the workplace itself and the different workplaces where adult safeguarding takes place need to change to enable you to implement making safeguarding personal, to enable you to implement the best research evidence about working with, for example, adults who are at risk of self-neglect. And you should not be afraid of escalating concerns when there is a disjunction between what your ethics are telling you, between what your knowledge base is telling you, a disjunction between that and the context within which you are working. And if I have a criticism, one of many in England about our safeguarding adult review system, it is that those reviews are not focusing sufficiently on the lived experience of work, whether that is district nursing, health visiting, GP, social care staff, care home staff, not focusing sufficiently on that lived experience of work and the potential for a disjunction between the research messages on the one hand and the lived experience on the other. And then a number of, I'm going to have to be quick, thoughts about some of the key challenges. The next few slides actually come from self-neglect research, and some of you may have listened to Susie who presented it yesterday evening at the Winds Hotel at a seminar there. But I think it applies across a number of types of abuse and neglect, not just self-neglect. And the first is, how do you respect an individual's autonomy and self-determination, particularly when they have mental capacity to take decisions, but at the same time demonstrate your duty of care as health and social work and other professionals? And as the slide tries to capture, there are, in an English context, and I suspect quite possibly in a Republic context, drivers for both polarities on the continuum. So on the one hand, codes of ethics, the European Convention of Human Rights, the right to private and family life, the right to liberty of the person, mental capacity legislation which enshrines the right to make unwise decisions. Don't watch me how I cross the road when there are trams running up and down. I'm a menace. And in England, a very long-standing tradition about the limits to state power, going all the way back to a muddy field outside of Windsor in 1215 known as Runnymede and Magna Carta. But on the other hand, the state has a duty of care, the state has a duty to protect people from foreseeable harm, and you will be working not just in self-neglect cases but in other type of cases where you can see harm coming down the track rapidly, and you think, what am I going to do here? The same European Convention, the right to life, the right to live free of inhuman and degrading treatment. And of course you will be working in some situations where there's not only risk to the individual, but there are risks to others. So what we are finding in England, what you may be also finding in the Republic, is that this is a key challenge. It emerges from quite a few safeguarding adult reviews that have been done in England, both before and after the implementation of the CARE Act. Here's one judicial statement which gets to the nub of the challenge. The bit in red, I think, is what sums up this challenge so clearly. What good is it making someone safer if it merely makes them miserable? But if you decide not to intervene because you're worried about making them that miserable, you may end up in the coroner's court in England with a coroner wagging a finger at you and saying, why the hell did somebody not do something here? Because it was obvious, brackets with the benefit of hindsight, that something should have been done. Yeah, that's the core dilemma. What often happens in England is that people prioritise autonomy and self-determination. They say this is a lifestyle choice. This is an unwise decision. We might not take it, but this individual is taking it. There is therefore nothing we can do. And in my roles as adult safeguarding consultant and chair of safeguarding adult boards in England, if anybody ever says to me this is a lifestyle choice, my immediate response is, how do you know? Did you talk about it? Was this choice really chosen? How are you sure that this is actually a choice? I met a number of individuals in self-neglect research, for example, who as a result of severe and enduring forms of mental distress, but who had nonetheless been assessed as having capacity, were making what people described as a lifestyle choice. But was it? I met a number of people with severe and long-standing physical health problems with capacity, and people were saying this is a lifestyle choice. But I watched some of those individuals try to get out of bed, try to dress, try to wash, try to cook, yeah, and finding it enormously difficult and giving up. Is that a lifestyle choice? Do we really interrogate choice and the control that people have over their lives? And that's what this slide is about. It's arguing that in making safeguarding personal, you can question, you can respectfully challenge, not because you want to override all of their wishes and feelings, not because you want to reduce all risk, but because you want to have a concerned conversation. And this is, again, from the self-neglect research, but I think it's broader than that. And it's what service users actually said to us over time made a difference. And I think you can see some of the elements of making safeguarding personal emerging from that. Not least the importance of humanity, but also the importance, and this again I think is one of the skills that we need to have and one of the skills that trainers can develop. We actually need to fit our style, our approach to what individuals can manage and cope with. And I describe this as sometimes you can go in through the front door. In transactional analysis terms, you can have a direct adult-to-adult conversation. But you can't do that with everybody, because they'll shut up shop and they'll become very defensive and they'll think you're being bossy and overtaking them. So you have to do what I call going through the side door or going through the back door. You have to find questions that take you from the remote past up to the present, or that bring you back from the remote future to the present. You have to find ways of trying to engage people in a conversation when going through the front door won't do. Now, whether that is out of systemic family therapy, circular questions, the use of hypotheses, looking for the latitude, whether it's that kind of methodology that might work, or whether you have other theoretical bases on which to draw. It's fitting your knowledge set and your style to what the individual can manage, and some of those quotes I think get there. Equally important is motivational interviewing. Again, I think that's one of the key skills that has an emergent evidence base in adult safeguarding, as it has a well-established evidence base in some other areas of social work and healthcare activity. Sometimes you'll need the skills of motivational interviewing to get people to a point where they actually will engage with you in a conversation ultimately designed to make safeguarding personal. The next slide or two focuses on the contentious question of mental capacity. I think we're probably all relatively comfortable with the top left box. Someone has capacity, someone is looking after themselves, we respect their autonomy. We are probably more or less comfortable with the idea that someone without mental capacity to take a relevant decision at a particular point in time, and at the risk of harm, we will act in their best interests, right? Where necessary, alongside an advocate to enable the person themselves to engage in the adult safeguarding process, and trying wherever possible to find a proportional intervention that reflects as close as possible the individual's wishes and feelings. It's the top right box that's challenging. What do you do in cases where an individual is assessed under mental capacity legislation as having capacity, but is at risk of significant harm? And there may be case studies, human stories that you can bring to the table that identifies the strengths and the vulnerabilities in your republic system when you're faced with cases in that box. What I, and indeed Susie last evening, would want to emphasise in this, and here I think occupational therapists, any OTs in the room? No OTs in the room, no one owning up anyway to be an OT. Actually can teach the rest of us something to do with capacity assessments, and it's known as articulate and demonstrate. Because what we have understood from court of protection judgments in England, what we've understood from the research, particularly around self-neglect, but not just around self-neglect, is that sometimes there is a difference between a conversation that we have about a decision that we're facing in theory and actually what we do in practice. and it's the difference between decisional capacity and executive capacity. So today it's pouring with rain, right? Traditional Irish weather. Yep. Forgive me. You know, an older person, you may be having a conversation with an older person, it's very cold today, it's very wet today, you know. What are you going to wear? You know, if you decide to go out for a purposeful walk, what are you going to wear? The individual may well tell you what they're going to wear. Decisional capacity is left-sided brain. But do they do it in reality? That's right-sided brain. Yeah? So you may actually work with people who can talk the talk about decisions, but actually when it comes to taking those decisions, they don't take those decisions. And then they're struggling to manage the consequences of the decisions that they have not taken or indeed taken. And an example of that is the Court of Protection case in England known as GW. This is an individual, some of you may have heard last evening, who had Huntington's chorea. She was deprived of her liberty in a care home. She was challenging her deprivation of liberty in that care home because she wished to go out. The care home and the local authority believed that actually she would be unsafe, not least in road awareness, if she went out unescorted. She wanted to go out unescorted. She advocated for herself in the Court of Protection. And the judge had to determine whether she had not only decisional capacity, but executive capacity. At the end, the judge decided that her deprivation of liberty was lawful because he was persuaded by the evidence that although she could talk the talk of keeping her safe, she couldn't implement it. So again, in terms of what is current in the Republic and what might be being shared in the future, what might be a future system in the Republic, does your mental capacity legislation give enough space to executive capacity? In England, we have a real problem with our mental capacity legislation, not least because it's difficult to understand and it's difficult to apply in general, and the House of Lords thinks it's not fit for purpose, and for once I agree with the upper house, but also because we don't give enough explicit space to the difference between decisional capacity and executive capacity. We also need to understand people's experience. I touched on the individual whose case I'm jointly reviewing with Susie, and said how little we actually understood about that individual's experience. Again, this is drawn from the self-neglect research, and you can read about it in what we've published. But it's just a way of saying you need to understand the lived experience of individuals. And indeed, where those individuals are living in families, you need to understand the family experience, both the historic experience and the here and now experience. If you watched me with my father, you would need to understand not just how we interact and dance delicately around each other now, but my 65 and 3/4 year experience of being a child of my father. And indeed his experience of the challenges of being a father when his father died before he was born. You know, so it's just a way of saying you need to think family at times. And if in the Republic you have a system that is similar to that which we have in England, which is we no longer have generic social work, we have children's services departments and adult service departments, and we have children's mental health and we have adult mental health. You know, the importance of thinking family and the importance of creating bridges is oh so important. So here are some themes and some quotes from people. Here are some more themes and some quotes for people, simply to make the point that in making safeguarding personal, you need to understand the lived experience. Okay, I need to really speed up because I've been given a 5-minute warning sign and I overran yesterday. Sorry? 50? Oh, 15 minutes. Oh, that's even better. I can slow down again. No, don't slow down, Michael. Don't slow down. Okay. Let me focus here on, how good do you feel as frontline practitioners and as managers of practitioners in talking about risk with individuals? How comfortable do you feel having honest conversations with people? I used to find that incredibly difficult as a social worker when I started out, and there are still occasions when I will avoid difficult conversations because they're difficult. Yeah? And I have to be held in a psychodynamic sense, if not in a physical sense, by supervisors and managers. I have to be held both before and after in order to have those difficult conversations. How comfortable are you with your legal knowledge? Not just your legal knowledge about adult safeguarding as it affects health and social work and social care professionals, but legal knowledge in relation to what your public health and environmental health colleagues might do. Your legal knowledge about what housing personnel might have to offer. How comfortable are you with that span of legal knowledge so that in fact you can be John McEnroe's and Spice Girls, right? So that you can say to agencies, you cannot be serious here. Why the Spice Girls? Well, I'll tell you what I want, what I really want. Right? And what you really want is derived not just from your knowledge, however sketchy, of the legal powers and duties that the different agencies have, but your knowledge and your practice wisdom that comes from knowing an awful lot about self-neglect, about dementia, about modern slavery, about FGM, about whatever it happens to be, that you're bringing all of that into a multi-agency forum, along with the individual's own wishes and feelings. And those of you who are involved in staff development and training, well, the skills that you have to pass on and the skills that you can enable others to develop, to have those honest conversations and to sing the Spice Girls song from time to time. Okay, doing an MSP, well, here you are. I think we've covered a lot of this. Perhaps the one thing to emphasize here is that my whole experience as a child protection social worker a long time ago, a mental health social worker a long time ago, more recently working with people when I'm doing safeguarding adult reviews, is that they might not always agree with your decision, but they will respect your decision-making process if you are open, honest and transparent about it. Yes, they'll possibly disagree with you about why you are deciding to do A rather than B. But if you are transparent, if you are open, if you are honest about your concerns, they will, at the very least, respect you for that. So we're talking about people's own desired outcomes, but we're also talking about the importance of negotiated outcomes, where on the basis of your knowledge and your experience, you are contributing things into a conversation. But we're also recognizing that for a small group of individuals, sometimes you will have to protect them even if they don't want you to. And that is, I think, perhaps more easily recognisable in the Scottish system with the 3 protection orders they have, banning orders, removal orders and assessment orders, where in unique sets of circumstances, and the orders are not used very often, they seek a judicial order in Scotland from the sheriff in order to intervene to protect, even though that is a major intrusion into someone's right to private and family life. And what we have found is that the MSP approach has value in terms of outcomes relating to prevention, partnership, proportionality, empowerment, service outcomes and accountability outcomes. Those are the key principles of adult safeguarding in England, and we have found that MSP makes a contribution to each of those. We've also found, and again, trainers in the room might listen up at this point, enormous value in family group conferencing, the model that originally came from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and has now been rolled out in a number of European countries, not just in adult safeguarding, but across other issues as well. Value in mediation and conflict resolution approaches, value in working alongside our police colleagues in achieving best evidence in order to secure prosecutions of people who abuse and harm adults. The rest, I think, merely reinforces there what I think we have demonstrated through the use of MSP. But again, I would stress the importance of feedback and evaluation. And, you know, you don't need academics necessarily, although please don't make me unemployed, but you don't need, yeah, thank you. You don't need to be academics to actually develop your research and your evaluation skills. You know, thinking about what outcomes are you trying to achieve at the beginning, and thinking about how you're going to record the evidence that as you go through this journey with an individual, that may enable you at the end to say the degree to which the individual's outcomes were achieved, why not, and the degree to which the negotiated outcomes between you were achieved, why and why not. Building that into your social work and healthcare systems and practices, and perhaps using staff development personnel to help you do that. A slide about what facilitates. We have found practitioners enormously enthusiastic about this model, and I've highlighted that was a welcome counterbalance to the demands that we were placing on people. The importance of advocacy for those individuals who would otherwise struggle to engage in the process. There is now a statutory right to advocacy in England as a result of the CARE Act. The rest, I think, I've probably at least hinted at, if not explicitly covered. So, practice is more effective when, a whole set of skills there. This is not rocket science, this is just reminding us of actually what works between individuals, or what is more likely to work between individuals. It reminds us of the importance of some key principles that I've no doubt as students, healthcare workers and social work and social care workers in the room were trained in. And in summary, I see adult safeguarding and MSP within it as being a cocktail which will tell you what I'm going to do when I get to the airport later this afternoon, although it will be a Guinness probably, because I understand there is a Guinness bar in the departures lounge, and I shall probably avail myself of that facility. So the glass that contains adult safeguarding, the stem that supports it, which is relationship. And then you can't see the liquid, but you can see the 3 olives, or if you like snowballs, which dates me, cherries. Right? The importance of being how we are and how we come across. The importance of knowing, drawing on our practice wisdom, drawing on our knowledge, drawing on our research base. And fundamentally, the importance of how we do. Absolutely crucial. What helps in that, because you are part of organisations, so the organisations at this point need to listen up. You know, the adequacy of supervision. It's a scandal in England that when I trained and qualified in 1978, we were talking about the importance of supervision and the variability of it. And in 2017, come 2018, we are still talking about the variability of supervision. And we've had task forces and reform groups and goodness knows what else, and we are still not guaranteeing decent supervision for our social work and healthcare staff. It is a disgrace. And you know, maybe it's different in the Republic, but if it isn't, you need to do something about it. Peer support, the value of these kinds of occasions, but the value of team working, and the value actually of working, if I may say, with people like Martina and Siobhan. yeah, who, whatever their elevated positions in the hierarchy, haven't forgotten their knowledge and their values. And please don't contradict me, because I've just beefed them up. The importance of specialist advice, drawing on lawyers, for example, the importance of clear policies and procedures. Is that the context in which you are working? If not, you need to provide your own human stories. Right. Okay, and then very lastly, just a number of slides on what we've learned from safeguarding adult reviews. We don't collect them nationally at the moment in England, so you have to trawl through individual websites. There are some thematic reviews, and if you need references to thematic reviews of different kinds of safeguarding adult reviews, drop me an email and I'll send you links. Interestingly, across the thematic reviews, two types of abuse and neglect dominate. One is organisational abuse and neglect. Your Arras Attractor Swinford scandal, if I can put it that way. Well, we have umpteen of those in England, not just Winterbourne View, Orchid View, Atlas TI, and a number of such. And that reinforces the importance not just of focusing on the adequacy of the market for placements, but also what training are we providing to care home staff, what oversight are we providing of care homes, and how robust is the regulator. And I have views about the Care Quality Commission in England in that context. But the second most dominant type of case reviewed, self-neglect. And interestingly, safeguarding adult boards were reviewing cases of self-neglect in England before it was included by the Care Act in adult safeguarding arrangements. So concerned were they about the practice in relation to self-neglect. And then some examples. I don't have time to go through them now. They're all published, other than the Waltham Forest one. But you can get that if you ask the Waltham Forest Safeguarding Adult Board Business Manager. They all have key messages about the importance of safeguarding being everybody's responsibility, but the importance of making sure that you understand the individual within that. And there are a number where I've said there is a focus particularly on primary care, GPs, district nurses, and so on. You can find them on the Safeguarding Adult Board websites. They are a key source of learning. And then just very lastly, three or so slides which just highlight the importance of risk assessment. How good are your risk assessments, right? Do staff development and training officers have something to contribute around risk assessments? I focus today on MSP, the lack of personalised care planning, or sometimes the fact that we prioritise the individual's wishes to the exclusion of all other risks that are known about, right? We have to find a balance. The challenge of assessing mental capacity, thinking family, etc. The importance of the organisational context, the importance of organisational culture, the importance of supervision, so often absent in England, the importance of people having manageable workloads. As an independent chair of a safeguarding adult board, I want to know what your workloads look like. Yeah? Yeah? What hours are you working? How manageable are the risks within your workloads as a result of the responsibilities that you are carrying? Because as an independent chair in England, I've got responsibility of bringing to the notice of elected representatives when actually they've taken so much money out of the system that actually the workloads are dangerous. And interagency cooperation, and I'll stop with this. Too many examples of agencies working in silos. So whatever structures you have in the Republic going forward, you need to think about how strategically and operationally we can configure the legal rules and the statutory guidance to make sure that the agencies do work together and that there is senior leadership driving that from the very top. I've got to the end. I'm 2 minutes late. I'm terribly sorry.